Bizarre deaths don't always come from recklessness. Sometimes they come from overconfidence. One corporate lawyer charged into a window to prove its strength. A stuntman hit the mark from 22 stories up, only for the airbag to fail. And a hopeful inventor leapt from the Eiffel Tower in a parachute suit he designed himself. Stay with us as we count down the 20 bizarre ways people have met their end.
Lawyer versus window. In front of a group of law students, a corporate lawyer in Toronto ran full speed into his office window to prove how strong it was. Hoy was a successful Toronto lawyer, smart, respected, educated, and absolutely convinced the glass in his office was unbreakable. Not like industry standard unbreakable, more like watch me throw my entire body at it, unbreakable. This wasn't a first-time stunt. Hoy had launched himself into the glass wall before. Repeatedly, it had always held. Until one day, in front of a group of visiting law students, he decided to demonstrate it again. He took a running start, he slammed into the window, and this time, the frame gave out. The glass didn't break. Technically, he was right. But the whole structure popped from its moorings, and Hoy sailed through the 24th floor window like a human wrecking ball with no chain. He fell to his death in the courtyard below. Now, there are worse ways to go, but few are more ironic. A man trying to prove how indestructible something is by repeatedly attacking it becomes the reason it fails. Not because the material broke, but because confidence outpaced physics. His colleagues were shocked. The glass passed all building codes. The court of gravity, however, ruled otherwise. Gary Hoy is remembered not just for being a lawyer, but for being the only man in legal history to lose an argument with a window. Fatal free-fall stunt. He jumped from the 22nd floor of a construction site to set a world record for the highest free-fall ever survived. It was supposed to be the defining moment of his career. Ajay Bakunis has done this before, multiple times. Falls from staggering heights, each one caught on film, each one ending with a soft landing on a giant airbag. This time, everything was set. Cameras rolling, crowd watching. His father is in the audience. The jump itself went perfectly. Clean form, direct hit. Then the airbag split. Instead of absorbing the impact, it collapsed. Bakunis hit the ground with full force. He was rushed to the hospital, conscious but critically injured. The next day, he died. At the time, Bakunis was a rising star in the stunt world. Doubling for actors in major films, chasing records, and pushing physical limits most people wouldn't dream of testing. But the thing about pushing limits is that, eventually, they push back. This wasn't a miscalculation in the jump. It wasn't reckless. It was a mechanical failure. The kind of one-in-a-million flaw that turns a controlled stunt into a fatal accident. His death shook the industry. The stunt had been done to reclaim a record that had just been broken days earlier. Taylor's parachute leap. In 1912, a crowd gathered at the base of the Eiffel Tower to watch a man leap off it. Franz Reichelt, an Austrian-born tailor living in Paris, had designed a revolutionary parachute suit, a wearable device meant to save lives in falls from great heights. Aviation was still new, flight was risky, and Reichelt believed he had the solution. The press dubbed him the Flying Tailor. He promised a safe, controlled descent. The plan was simple. He would test the suit himself. From the first platform of the Eiffel Tower, about 187 feet up. Police assumed he'd use a dummy. So did the crowd. But when Reichelt arrived in his parachute suit, bulky and awkward, he made it clear he was jumping. Despite warnings, despite his friends' concerns, even though every test with mannequins had failed, he climbed over the railing. Moments later, he jumped. The parachute barely opened. His body plummeted straight down, hitting the frozen ground seconds later. He was killed instantly. His fall was captured on film, making his death not only public, but one of the first fatal moments ever recorded in motion. Reichelt wasn't reckless. He wasn't chasing fame. He truly believed his invention would work. He trusted it enough to bet his life on it. And that's what makes it all the more tragic. He didn't die in a stunt. He died in a demonstration. A man trying to bring safety to aviation became a cautionary tale instead. His suit is still preserved in a museum. The grainy footage of his jump still circulates, and his name lives on, not as a pioneer of parachutes, but as a sobering reminder of what happens when belief in an idea outruns its reality. Yankee Leaper's last jump. He was known as the Yankee Leaper, a mill worker turned daredevil who jumped off waterfalls, bridges, and cliffs for cheering crowds. His signature move? Leaping from absurd heights into rivers below, arms tight to his sides, body rigid, slicing into the water like a human javelin. He wasn't just surviving the drops, he was thriving off them. He jumped from the Passaic Falls in New Jersey, then over the base of Niagara Falls. Always dramatic, always successful. His motto, some things can be done as well as others, but then he pushed it one leap too far. On November 13, 1829, Patch climbed a platform over High Falls on the Genesee River in Rochester, New York. The drop, around 125 feet. It wasn't his first time there. A few days earlier, he jumped from the same location as a warm-up, but this time, he wanted it to be bigger. He built a taller platform and packed the crowd in. The leap looked clean, but something went wrong. He hit the water awkwardly, maybe a twist, maybe too stiff. Witnesses said the splash wasn't right. He never surfaced. His body was found days later, frozen in the river downstream. What killed him wasn't the height. It was the margin of error. At that speed, even a slight mistake becomes lethal. He'd made a career out of beating the odds, and eventually, the odds decided they were done losing. Sam Patch was one of America's first stunt celebrities. He turned simple vertical drops into entertainment, rebellion, and brand building. And he became the earliest reminder that crowd-pleasing doesn't always end with applause. Wii Water Contest. A morning radio show came up with a contest. Drink water, don't use the bathroom, and win a Nintendo Wii. Simple rules. Stupid premise. Unbelievably high stakes. Jennifer Strange signed up. A 28-year-old mother of 3, she wasn't looking for fame or shock value, just a chance to win a game console for her kids. The segment was called Hold Your Wii for a Wii. Contestants were handed bottle after bottle of water, told to drink as much as possible without relieving themselves. Listeners tuned in to laugh at the discomfort. DJs joked about exploding bladders. One even mentioned someone could die from this. They kept going anyway. Jennifer drank nearly 2 gallons. Her stomach was distended. She complained of severe pain. On-air recordings later revealed her saying she didn't feel right. Still, the contest continued. She finished in second place. No Wii and prize. Just a brutal headache and nausea. Hours later, she was found dead in her home. The cause? Water intoxication. Her sodium levels dropped so dangerously low that her brain swelled. Her body shut down. This wasn't a dare. It wasn't a thrill-seeking stunt. It was a publicity bit. The kind designed to go viral before viral was even a thing. Nobody at the station had medical supervision on standby. Nobody stopped it when warnings came in. And nobody imagined that a giveaway built around a kid's toy would end in an autopsy. The show was canceled. 10 employees were fired. A wrongful death lawsuit awarded her family $16 million. But none of that changes how absurd the headline still sounds. Woman dies trying to win a Wii. Scientist crushed by cart. One of the most brilliant scientific minds of the 20th century was taken out by a rain-soaked street and a horse. Pierre Curie, Nobel Prize winner, pioneer in radioactivity, co-discoverer of radium, literal cornerstone of modern physics, met his end not in a lab, not in an experiment gone wrong, but on a wet road in Paris. It was April 1906. He was walking along Rue Dauphine during a rainstorm. The pavement was slick. At some point, he slipped and fell into the path of an oncoming horse-drawn cart. The driver couldn't stop in time. One of the wheels rolled over Curie's head, crushing his skull instantly. No lab explosion, just the brutal mechanics of early 20th century transportation. At the time, Curie was at the peak of his work, pushing the boundaries of what was known about atomic energy. He and his wife, Marie Curie, had already made world-changing discoveries. His death was so abrupt, so mundane in its violence, that many couldn't wrap their heads around it. The man who helped unlock the building blocks of matter was undone by poor traction and a horse that couldn't swerve. Detective's deadly slip. The founder of the first U.S. detective agency survived assassination plots, train robbers, and war. What finally got him? A sidewalk. Alan Pinkerton, the man who built an empire on solving other people's problems, died because he bit his own tongue. The story goes like this. He slipped on the pavement, fell hard, and bit down. The wound didn't seem like a big deal at first. No broken bones, just a nasty bite. But he didn't get it treated. Days passed. Infection set in. The cut developed gangrene, and without antibiotics or proper care, the bacteria spread. Slowly, silently, fatally. He died not long after. This was a man who'd foiled an alleged plot to assassinate Abraham Lincoln, who chased down Jesse James, who invented modern investigative techniques. And yet, his final case was internal and unsolved. It wasn't a gunfight or a poisoned drink or a mysterious disappearance. It was a fall, a tongue injury, and a body that couldn't fight what it didn't fully understand. Lawyer's fatal demo. In court, theatrics can help win a case. But Clement Vallandigham took courtroom drama to a fatal level. He was a lawyer, former U.S. congressman, and a man known for his bold, often controversial stances. In 1871, he was defending a man accused of murder. The defense argued that the victim had accidentally shot himself during a struggle, and Vallandigham wanted to make that point stick. So, during a break from the trial, he decided to physically demonstrate how the shooting could have been self-inflicted. He picked up a pistol he believed to be unloaded, slipped it into his pocket, mimicked the scuffle, and pulled the trigger. The gun wasn't empty. He shot himself in the abdomen. The bullet tore through his internal organs. Within a day, he was dead. Ironically, the demonstration worked. His client was acquitted. The theory held up. But Vallandigham never made it back to court to hear the verdict. His attempt to prove reasonable doubt became an unforgettable exhibit in fatal overcommitment. His death is often remembered as one of the most bizarre self-inflicted accidents in legal history, not just because of the cause, but because of the timing. He died in the middle of proving someone else's innocence, with the exact act that proved it. Sniper silences general. In the middle of a battlefield, under fire, a Union general looked out across the chaos and said something he would not live long enough to regret. They couldn't hit an elephant at this distance. John Sedgwick was a seasoned officer, trusted, respected, the kind of commander whose presence steadied troops under pressure. It was May 1864, at the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse during the American Civil War. Confederate sharpshooters were actively targeting Union soldiers from a distance, and Sedgwick's men were ducking for cover. He wasn't impressed. As bullets whistled past, he stood tall, chastising his men for flinching. The quote was meant to calm nerves, to show strength, but before the sentence was fully out of his mouth, he was shot in the face by a Confederate sniper. He died instantly. There's no metaphor here, just the sudden, brutal contradiction between what he said and what happened next. Sedgwick's death became one of the most infamous battlefield ironies in American military history. Not because he was reckless, but because he misread the moment so completely. A man who had survived years of war, multiple campaigns, and countless threats was taken out in the exact instant he chose to dismiss danger. It wasn't hubris in the cartoonish sense. He wasn't boasting or grandstanding. He was trying to project calm, to show his men there was nothing to fear. But fear, in that case, was rational. The enemy really could hit something at that distance, and they did. Inventor crushed by press. The printing press he invented could produce newspapers faster than ever before. It revolutionized the industry. It also killed him. William Bullock was an American inventor who, in the 1860s, developed the Webb rotary press, a high-speed, roll-fed machine that transformed how newspapers were printed. It was efficient, powerful, and, as it turned out, merciless when something went wrong. In 1867, while installing one of his presses at the Philadelphia Public Ledger, Bullock noticed a belt was out of alignment. He reached in to adjust, and his leg got caught in the machinery. Crushed, mutilated. He survived the initial accident, but the injury quickly turned into something far worse. Infections took hold, gangrene spread. Days later, he died during an attempted amputation. His own invention became the reason he never saw its full impact.
Let's dive in. It's finally time for the open discussion.
This is the silliest way someone died in all of the world, and the expression on her face says it all. Panic, shock, and maybe even regret. Hanging high above the city, every second feels like a gamble with gravity. Was she chasing a thrill, proving a point, or just caught in the craziest dare ever? And if it were you, would the fear freeze you or fuel you? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to mention #OpenDiscussion. Engineer's foot infection. Before the Brooklyn Bridge could rise, its creator had to die. John A. Roebling was one of the most visionary civil engineers of his time. a man who quite literally built the way forward. He designed the Brooklyn Bridge, a feat of suspension engineering that would connect Manhattan and Brooklyn for the first time. But before a single cable was strung, he suffered a small injury that ended everything. In 1869, while scouting locations near the East River, Roebling's foot was crushed in a freak accident. A ferry pinned it against the dock. It wasn't a high-speed collision, not an act of violence, just a few seconds of pressure in the wrong place at the wrong time. Doctors recommended amputation. Roebling refused. He opted instead to treat the injury with water therapy, a method he believed in deeply. It didn't work. The wound became infected. Tetanus set in. Within weeks, his body locked up from muscle spasms, and he died in agony. Jack Daniel's stubbed toe. The man behind one of the world's most iconic whiskey brands didn't die from drinking. He died from losing his temper at a safe. Jack Daniel, yes, that Jack Daniel, reportedly came into work one morning, tried to open his office safe, forgot the combination, and in a moment of pure frustration, kicked it. Hard. The story goes that the impact injured his toe. A small break, maybe a cut. Seemed like nothing at the time. It wasn't. The wound became infected. That infection spread, eventually turning into full-blown blood poisoning. In 1911, with limited medical options, Jack Daniel died from what started as an impulsive kick to a metal box. Now, to be fair, some accounts dispute the details. Some say the infection wasn't directly linked to the safe incident, but no version of the story is flattering. Whether it was a stubbed toe, an untreated wound, or just incredibly bad luck, the result was the same. A man who built an empire from barrels and sour mash was undone by his own foot. The irony is hard to ignore. Jack Daniel built a business on precision, craft, and control. Yet his death came from a burst of impatience. The safe, it turns out, held its ground. He didn't. Orange peel death. The man who plunged over Niagara Falls in a steel barrel survived with nothing worse than a few broken bones. Years later, he slipped on an orange peel and died. Bobby Leach was a professional stuntman, the second person in history to survive going over the falls. In 1911, he sealed himself inside a custom-made barrel, was tossed into the violent current, and dropped 167 feet into churning water. He emerged battered, but alive. Headlines followed. So did fame. He spent the next years touring the world, retelling his survival story, posing with his barrel, and building a name as one of the era's great daredevils. Then, in 1926, during a publicity trip to New Zealand, he was walking down the street when he slipped on an orange peel. The fall wasn't dramatic, it just broke his leg. At first, it seemed like a minor injury, painful but treatable. But the break became infected. Doctors eventually amputated his leg, but it was too late. Complications set in, and the man who survived Niagara Falls died from slipping on fruit. Strongman versus rusty nail. He could bend iron bars, lift grown men like sacks of flour, and pull carts with his teeth. But the world's strongest man was killed by a rusty nail. Zichy Breitbart was a legend in the 1920s, a circus performer, blacksmith, and self-made symbol of raw, unstoppable strength. Billed as the Iron King and the Superman of the ages, he toured Europe and America performing feats that felt almost supernatural. Bending horseshoes with his hands, carrying entire platforms stacked with people, snapping chains across his chest. His body was a spectacle, but it wasn't invincible. During a live performance, Breitbart attempted one of his signature stunts, hammering nails into wooden boards using only his hands. But this time, something went wrong. One of the spikes slipped and drove straight into his knee. It didn't look like a career-ending injury. Painful, yes. Serious, maybe. But not fatal. He continued his tour for a while, ignoring the wound, even as it worsened. What he didn't know, or chose not to confront, was that the nail was rusty. The puncture wound became infected. Gangrene set in, slowly eating away at his leg. By the time doctors intervened, it was too late. Amputation wasn't enough. The infection had spread. Zichy Breitbart died at the age of 32, not in a failed stunt, but from a simple, stupid injury that could have been avoided, or at least treated. Racer decapitated by chain. At over 170 miles per hour, there's no margin for error. J.G. Perry Thomas knew that, and went faster anyway. In the 1920s, he was one of Britain's leading engineers and race car drivers, obsessed with pushing machines, and himself, beyond the edge of what was considered possible. His custom-built car, Babs, was a Frankenstein machine. Massive aero engine, chain-driven raw power with barely any safety features. It was loud, unstable, and absurdly fast. In 1926, he broke the world land speed record, but it didn't last. The very next year, Malcolm Campbell took the title back. That didn't sit well with Perry Thomas. So, in March 1927, he returned to Pendine Sands, a beach in Wales, long, flat, and deadly, determined to win it back. On a record attempt run, something went catastrophically wrong. As Babs screamed down the beach, the drive chain, which transferred power from the engine to the wheels, snapped. At that speed, it became a high-velocity whip of steel. It tore through the car's bodywork and struck Perry Thomas in the head, decapitating him instantly. Early reports claimed the car had rolled over. It hadn't. The machine was still intact, but the violence was all internal, a mechanical failure that turned precision engineering into shrapnel. He died chasing a number on a stopwatch, anvil barrel plunge. By 1920, Niagara Falls had already claimed its share of daredevils. Some lived, some didn't. Charles Stevens was convinced he'd be in the first group. A barber from Bristol, England, he styled himself as the Demon Barber. Not for how he cut hair, but for the stunt he planned, surviving a plunge over Niagara Falls inside a wooden barrel. At the time, it was still seen as the ultimate test of courage, or recklessness, and Stevens wanted the glory. He also wanted to make sure he didn't bounce out of the barrel on impact. So he tied his feet to an anvil, hoping it would keep him stable as he dropped. The plan was simple. The logic, not so much. On July 11, 1920, he launched his barrel over the Horseshoe Falls. Seconds later, the barrel smashed into the river below, and the anvil did exactly what anvils do. It tore straight through the bottom and dragged Stevens out of the barrel and down into the depths. His body was never fully recovered. Only one of his arms was found, still tied to the barrel. Stevens had ignored advice from other daredevils, some of whom had already survived similar stunts. He was told his barrel design was too weak. He was warned not to use the anvil. He dismissed it all, and for a few seconds it probably felt like history was being made. But gravity is indifferent to ambition. An anvil doesn't care how brave you are. Stevens became the first person to die attempting to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel. His name is mostly forgotten today, overshadowed by those who survived and went on talk tours. His death didn't make him famous. It made him an example. Ball player falls at Niagara. One of baseball's earliest superstars didn't go out with a record-breaking hit. He went out with a drunken fall into Niagara Falls. Ed Delahanty was a big name at the turn of the 20th century, a Hall of Famer before the Hall even existed, a slugger with over 100 career home runs, back when that actually meant something, and a .346 lifetime batting average. He was a five-tool player before anyone called it that, but by 1903, his life off the field had started to unravel. On July 2nd, he boarded a train bound for New York. He was drunk, loud, and according to reports, carrying a straight razor. Eventually, he became so disruptive that the conductor had no choice. He stopped the train and kicked Delahanty off near the International Bridge at the US-Canada border. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. What happened next is still unclear. He may have tried to walk across the bridge. He may have stumbled. He may have jumped. What we know is this: his body was found a week later, floating near the bottom of Niagara Falls, mangled, missing a leg, still dressed in a torn evening suit. There were whispers of foul play, rumors of robbery. Some believed he'd been chased. Others said it was just the final act in a spiral of drinking and personal chaos. No one ever found a definitive answer. And by the time the story reached the public, it sounded like a tall tale. A baseball hero goes over Niagara Falls. It sounds impossible, but it happened. Delahanty was one of the best to ever pick up a bat, and he died soaked, alone, and forgotten at the bottom of a river. Daredevil's hanging trick. By the time Samuel Gilbert Scott stepped onto Waterloo Bridge in 1841, he'd already survived more than one brush with death. He was used to dangling from ropes, leaping off tall structures, and putting his body through stunts that blurred the line between courage and self-destruction. That day, the crowd gathered, expecting another close call. Instead, they got the finale no one wanted. Scott was an American-born daredevil and former sailor who had turned his appetite for danger into a public spectacle. His signature act involved jumping from bridges or scaffolds with a rope attached, not for safety, but for dramatic effect. He'd swing by his neck or feet, fake a hanging, then drop and land in the water below. the act was meant to shock, and it did. But earlier that same week, during a performance in Deptford, the trick had already gone wrong. A rope slipped around his neck for real. He barely survived, unconscious, nearly strangled. But instead of retiring the stunt, he doubled down. Days later, he climbed atop Waterloo Bridge to try it again. This time, he wasn't so lucky. As he prepared the stunt, the noose slipped again. But now he was too high, too exposed, and too late to correct it. He dropped from the scaffold, and the rope did what ropes do. It tightened. The crowd at first thought it was part of the act. Applause turned to silence. Eventually, they realized he wasn't moving. Scott died there, hanging above the Thames in front of a live audience that had paid to be thrilled and left horrified. In the end, he didn't fall to his death. He performed his own hanging, accidentally, fatally, and exactly as he'd rehearsed, just without the escape. Pallbearer crushed by coffin. Carrying a coffin at a funeral is one of those solemn duties people perform out of respect. For Henry Taylor, it became the last thing he ever did. Around 1872 in London, Taylor was serving as a pallbearer, part of a funeral procession through the streets. He and several others were carrying a wooden coffin containing the body of a respected woman, following the usual ritual of slow, careful movement toward the burial site. Then Taylor tripped. He stumbled over a loose stone in the path, lost his footing, and fell forward. The coffin, still being held by the other pallbearers, shifted violently with the weight imbalance. It slipped, then it dropped, directly onto him. The full weight of the casket came down on Taylor's head and chest, crushing him instantly. By the time help arrived, there wasn't much to be done. He died on the scene. No wild stunt, no bizarre act of showmanship, just an everyday tragedy made surreal by its setting. One man was buried beneath another's casket before the funeral even made it to the grave. It sounds like the setup to a Victorian-era joke, a pallbearer killed by the very coffin he was helping carry. But it happened, and not in some slapstick farce, in a real funeral, surrounded by mourners, turning one burial into two. Taylor wasn't doing anything reckless. He was being respectful. He was performing an old ritual that countless others had done before him. But death doesn't care about formality, and fate has no issue with repetition. Diplomat falls asleep. In 1901, a 24-year-old guest at the New Haven House Hotel in Connecticut was found dead on the pavement below. The fall had been 60 feet. His body was discovered early in the morning, still dressed in evening clothes with no signs of a struggle. Adelbert S. Hay had one of the brightest futures in American politics. At just 24, he had already served as the U.S. consul in South Africa and had recently returned home, rumored to be preparing for a major diplomatic role, possibly even a fast-track path into the political elite. Instead, he fell out of a window. Hay was staying at the New Haven House Hotel in Connecticut. After a long evening out, he returned to his room, opened the window, and sat on the ledge, likely to get some fresh air. At some point during the night, he fell asleep. He never woke up. Hay's body was discovered on the concrete below, 60 feet down. There were no signs of a struggle, no suicide note, and nothing to suggest foul play. Just a hotel window, a moment of carelessness, and gravity doing what it does. Reports at the time speculated that he simply nodded off. It was a warm night. He was likely exhausted, and with his center of gravity just slightly too far outward, it took only one unconscious shift for everything to go wrong. The irony here isn't loud or theatrical. It's quiet and brutal. A rising star with diplomatic ambitions and presidential lineage, his father was U.S. Secretary of State John Hay, taken out not by scandal, violence, or politics, but by sleep. You'd expect a man like that to die on a battlefield, or in office, or at least somewhere with a bit more ceremony. Instead, the final chapter was a fall, sudden, silent, and absurdly preventable. If you enjoyed this list, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more unbelievable stories from history and beyond. Which death shocked you the most? Tell us in the comments!